This is Jack. Jack's distinctive phone greeting, never, "Hi, it's Jack here." This is Jack. The last time I got one of those phone calls was a month ago. "How are you?" I asked. His answer, "Well, that's a question. I've told them no more intervention." The phone call was really about planning this memorial celebration for this afternoon. When he asked me to do this eulogy, I felt both honoured and apprehensive, since I knew just how many people would be here today who loved Jack and were loved by him, and who knew Jack in contexts that were outside my own experience. I assume that in asking me to do this, he hoped that I'd put my music historian's hat on and try to give you all a fair picture of Jack Body, musician. So I shall begin, hoping that this is Jack. The historical bit has just been made a whole lot easier, thanks to the remarkable book that was launched a few days before Jack's death. There we see the photos of the beautiful house in rural Te Araha, and learn about the bulldozer with a steering wheel instead of levers that sat out in the yard, his enjoyment of childhood holidays at Waihi Beach, and his fondness for taking school friends up to the top of Mount Te Araha suggest that he had a happy and archetypal Kiwi upbringing. There are glimpses of Jack emerging as a champion at both music and athletics during his years at King's College in Auckland, and we learn of friendships formed in those years with Roger McGurr, Neil Brownlee, Philip's father, Ian Weddy, and Alan Thomas. We read of his studies with Ronald Tremaine at Auckland University and of his early encounters with Douglas Lilburn in the electronic studio at Victoria before pursuing this interest in Cologne and Utrecht. We're given a vivid sense of the impact that Asia, and Indonesia in particular, made on him during those first travels overseas. And particularly in the closing contribution from Jack himself, we meet Yono, and we see that handsome young man that Jack fell in love with in 1976, someone that we have all come to love and to admire, especially for his unfaltering and care and concern for our friend. My personal knowledge of Jack dates really from his appointment at Victoria University in 1980. He was appointed to the position from which Douglas Lilburn had just retired. Douglas remained a central figure in our lives, and he and Jack had a strong bond. Jack was one of those who took particular care of Douglas during his final illness. Jack joined a department that had David Farquhar and Ross Harris also teaching composition. Even at the time, I felt proud of the fact that our music department had three such remarkable composers, all figures who commanded respect and admiration, but who each had a completely distinct stylistic orientation. Not for us, the composer-in-residence approach of so many other universities abroad. Moreover, Jack joined a department with a strong interest in new music, with people like Margaret Nielsen and Elizabeth Kerr eager to facilitate performances of contemporary works. This, I guess, was partly the legacy of Naughty Fred Page and his successor Jenny MacLeod, who both spent their careers rebelling against anything that had the slightest whiff of colonial heritage or of academia about it. That strength in composition, the heritage built originally on Lilburn's appointment in 1947, continues in the New Zealand School of Music to this day. The other aspect of the Victoria University Music Department that made it such a congenial place for Jack was the gamelan, established at Vic in 1973 with the loan of a beautiful set of instruments from the Indonesian government, and augmented when Alan Thomas was appointed to the staff in 1977, bringing with him instruments from Cirebon. Apart from one fascinating introductory session with Yoko Sutrisno, I've never sat behind those instruments to play them, unlike Judith Exley and others here who have been part of the ensemble for decades. I nevertheless have a strong sense of privilege that this sound world became a significant feature of my own musical horizon and of every music student that passed through Victoria. New music, electroacoustic music, gamelan as an enduring window on the musics of Asia, these things have given a special character to the School of Music, and we've all been the richer for that, and Jack has been at the heart of them. Imagine the audacity of taking a New Zealand gamelan ensemble to Indonesia, not once, but several times. Jack the entrepreneur. Just think how many times Jack has made the impossible happen. I was overseas at the time of the original Sonic Circus in 1974, but I well remember the 1987 event. Everybody was mobilised. The NZSO, Schola Musica, the Victoria University Orchestra, I've forgotten who else, and it seemed like every space in what is on its way to becoming a Civic Square music hub was taken over. So too were the NZSO studios in Willis Street. And there were crowds thronging in those spaces at the concerts and moving between the extraordinary array of performances on offer. Then there were the Asia Pacific festivals in 1992 and 2007. For the 1992 festival, Jack asked whether Catherine and I would take a billet. Of course, thinking student composer, we agreed readily, and then found ourselves having Filipino conductor Francisco Feliciano, a personal friend of the Marcos family, staying in our house. And our house back then was furnished with bunks and beanbags. Francisco actually turned out to be a charming guest. Another of Jack's visitors to New Zealand, Professor Yao Shong Du, who came out for Ali, also stayed in our house for 3 weeks, and Catherine and I will always be grateful to Jack for introducing us to this remarkable man, one of the most brilliant, intelligent, funny people that we've ever met. Occasionally, making the impossible happen related to Jack's own projects. Ali actually is an outstanding example here, and Jack remained immensely grateful to Dr. Ian Pryor, who mobilised support when it looked as if the planned festival performances might not happen, and Ian was personally so generous, and Jack actually explicitly asked me to mention that today. Mostly, though, Jack's big projects were not about getting his own music performed. Many here will have reacted enthusiastically to requests from Jack to get in behind these projects. Why not? His charm, his sense of mission, and the fact that he was unsparing in his own efforts to make good things happen made such approaches irresistible. Our musical and cultural institutions responded similarly. Creative New Zealand, the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, the New Zealand International Festival of the Arts, the Auckland Festival, Chamber Music New Zealand, the Auckland Philharmonia, and so on. It's a long list. Jack's unique negotiating technique went something like this. Listen up. Stage 1, A and B are completely on board, we just need you, C, to get with the program. Stage 2, B and C are completely on board, we just need you, A, to get with the program. Stage 3, A and C are completely on board, well, you get the idea. Done. Meanwhile, back at A, B, and C, or the offices of A, B, and C, the decision makers are gazing out the window thinking, how did that happen? But we, were always pleased and proud that it did happen. Nobody could regret for a second the way Jack's initiatives have enriched musical life in New Zealand. Even if he'd never composed a note of music, he would have made a substantial contribution to music in Aotearoa. Many of the book's contributors testify to Jack's generosity and his desire to promote composers and music that he believed in. The single most telling example would probably be Waitiata Music Press. The catalogue expanded hugely during Jack's years. Typically, he extended operations to the issuing of CDs designed to illustrate and promote the work of the composers he published. The press received modest but regular support from the Lilburn Trust, and every year the members of the Trust's Music Advisory Committee would pore over budgets from Jack that made the concept of back of the envelope seem reasonably close to best practice. Michael Norris has now taken over as editor, and as you might expect, there's a new meticulousness surrounding the press's operations. Jack took over the press from Douglas Lilburn, who had founded it. Not stylistically, but in almost every other way, Douglas was an enormous and positive influence on Jack. He modelled selflessness in his desire to see New Zealand music flourish. Apart from Waitiata Music Press, he established the Lilburn Trust to further the cause. Jack told me a few months ago that, with Yono's blessing, he had made provision for the Lilburn Trust eventually to benefit from his estate. All who care about the development of music in New Zealand will be grateful for that. Most of all, of course, we should be grateful to Jack for his music. He was, above all else, a composer. One of my abiding memories will be of visiting Jack during his long and somewhat depressing stay in Wellington Hospital early in 2012. Jack had had his Acorn computer, the original Sibelius program host, brought into the hospital. Despite serious illness, he was determined to make the most of the opportunity provided by the APO Composer in Residence Award and was just getting on with it. Why is Jack a major composer? I think we're hearing that this afternoon, and of course this afternoon's concert is particularly interesting since, as Michael mentioned, these pieces were all chosen by Jack for this occasion. They meant a lot to him. Moreover, Michael is providing an expert introduction to all of these, so I don't need really to comment further, but I would like to conclude with some brief observations about pieces of Jack's that I know well through having conducted them. First, Poems of Solitary Delights. This was premiered at one of the last Cambridge music schools with John Hopkins conducting. John, a great champion of New Zealand music, had suggested to Jack that more varied metrical groupings than the original might work better. Hence, the Victoria University Orchestra got to test drive a revised version of the work in a concert later in the same year. This work has since been recorded in a further revision by the NZSO with Ken Young conducting. It's an absolutely delightful work, a setting of a cycle of poems by the 19th century Japanese poet Takabana Akami. It's easy to see why these appeal to Jack. The poems evoke an Asian setting. They are reflective and sensual. Some of the sensuality is directed at the tactile pleasures of taking up a brush to paint. Jack the artist, the photographer, must have related strongly to these. Above all, these poems have a whimsical quality that we recognise in Jack's personality. His settings are deftly written with exquisitely chosen orchestral colours. There are no double basses, so the strings have an airy quality. The lyric tenor soloist alternated between narration and occasional singing. In so many ways, these pieces seem quintessentially Jack. They're unlike anything else, and they're magic. More recently, I've conducted the meditations on Michelangelo with Opus Orchestra and Lara Hall as soloist. We heard one of these meditations at the NZSO the other night, and they are well represented this afternoon, both in a string quartet arrangement and through the song settings on which the original pieces are based. They seem set to become cornerstones of the repertoire, and deservedly so. The lyricism, the expressive harmonic treatment, and once again, the subtle range of timbre made the meditations a deeply personal work. Jack saw the Michelangelo poems as the testament of a gay artist and responded accordingly and very movingly. In one of his last conversations, Jack told me that the Songs and Dances of Desire, performed after many years of gestation at the Auckland Arts Festival in 2013, and Alley were the works that he regarded as his two greatest contributions. We're getting a glimpse of the Songs and Dances of Desire this afternoon. I've written about Alley in the book, so don't need to say anything more here, except that I do regard this opera as a work of genius, thrilling, beautiful, profound. It's been heartening in the last few days to hear that a performance of Alley is being planned in Hangzhou, China. The consoling thing about mourning an artist like Jack is to know that in the most important way possible, his work will live on. One hopes that as his reputation grows across the world, generations to come will feel proud that Jack Boddy lived and worked here in Aotearoa.